Hey, everybody. Oh, hello.
Hello.
Hey. That's
How are you?
hilarious. You tumbled to the ground. How are
Oh,
you doing?
I'm doing as well as I can, after the news broke this
Yeah,
morning.
it's a hard day for a lot of people today.
Yes, it is. How are you doing today?
I'm doing all right. Um, yeah, I don't know.
Yep.
Yeah,
Sending love out there to everyone. Sending love and joy. It's what we need.
yes, I think that's the best way to deal with most situations when there's something like it's just, okay, love to everybody, especially when people are hurting. It's like
Yeah.
to extend that to people.
Yes. That's how I like to live my life as much as I can.
It's a good way to be. Yeah, so it's so nice to meet you.
Likewise. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so for everybody, and I just see people joining and joining, so I'm excited. I think this is going to be a really, really cool conversation, and I'm really excited to have you on this. And my setup just got messed up because I had like my iPad on a stand, and it just tumbled to the ground. So now I'm kind of like leaning out.
Love that.
So we're,
Just gotta go with it.
yeah, we're gonna roll with it. But yeah, amazing. As everyone is uh, tuning in, you can drop a comment on where you're tuning in from. We'd love to see where you're from. And it's really cool being a part of the Women in Film Project because I've been able to talk to so many filmmakers from all over the world. So it's really creating a beautiful community everywhere of women in film and passing on inspirational stories of people in the industry. And there's a lot of people who follow the project who want to break into the industry themselves or they're earlier on in their journey, but
Mm-hmm.
to form community and share the tips and the strategies and the heartfelt stories so that everyone knows you're not alone as you're going after your goals and your dreams, and we're here for you. So that's really the mission, and I love being a part of it. And we're so excited to have you on here today, Adele.
Thank you.
Yeah. So if for everyone who's tuning in, if you want to give it maybe a brief introduction of yourself for those who don't know you already.
Yeah, so the basic gist of it is I'm a film composer, I'm a producer, I'm a string arranger, I'm also a violinist, so I teach violin and group music classes as well, and occasionally I also do some recording session work, usually just remotely, but film composing is my main gig.
Amazing. I love all the comments and all the people here. So I have, for everyone who's here, there's a Q&A box on Instagram Live. All of us are still kind of, even though it's been around a while, it's like learning how Instagram Live works. There's a little Q&A question mark button. You can submit questions and we'd love to answer them. And I have a bunch of questions here that were submitted in advance as well. And just to jump right into some of them, let's talk about how you started in the industry. And did you start with music? Did you start with film? What drew you to do what you're doing now?
I started playing violin when I was 7, so I feel like music's always been in my life in some capacity, but I was classically trained, so as anyone who's classically trained knows, you go to private lessons, you're in the orchestra, and that's kind of the extent of it. I went to a performing arts high school here in Phoenix, where I live, from 6th grade all the way till senior year. So it was very like traditional conservatory class situation. But by the time I got to about age 15, I felt like I wasn't being creatively fulfilled by playing other people's music. Like there was a part of me that wanted to make things, but I didn't really understand what that feeling was at the time. But luckily I had teachers who knew me personally really well who kind of saw that need to start writing. So they introduced me to composing, and I tried composing classically at first, but I felt like it wasn't really my thing. And that's when I started thinking a lot about, I love movies. I love movie music. It's a lot of these stories mean a lot to me. That's how I spend time with my dad, and that's what film composing, it just has a lot of feelings of nostalgia, and I'm sure anyone else who writes film music or enjoys it knows what I'm trying to get at here. It's hard to use words to explain. But so around 15, 16 was when I started film composing. And then I went to college for music, which is where I just kept training in the classical traditional composition style while also getting connected with film students that I went to college with. And that's kind of how I started. And then I graduated and went freelance right as COVID hit. So it was really great timing. I spent a lot of time at home like everyone else, which is when I took that time to really educate myself about the industry and connect with people online and get to know the community better. And then, you know, through things like this and awesome projects, I feel like I made a lot of friends and collaborators all over the world just online, which is really cool.
That's amazing. Was a lot of your networking just online or meeting people through, I don't know, how did you find people and network? Was that certain communities you're already a part of?
Yeah, well, I will recommend for anyone watching, if you're not already a part of the Society for Composers and Lyricists, the SCL is our guild. And so during COVID, they had a lot of Zoom meetings, Q&As with other composers, and also, I wouldn't say networking sessions, but kind of like where you get to know other composers. Also, the Alliance for Women Film Composers pretty much does the same thing, but obviously the women and their allies in the community. So the nice thing, I guess, silver lining about the pandemic was everyone was home, so more people were in these Zooms, and that was kind of where I was meeting people. And I will say, really, like, don't underestimate the power of the internet. Even if we aren't together in person physically, that doesn't mean the connection is any less strong. So a lot of my really good friends and mentors and confidants and people I trust in this industry, I've only worked with virtually, which is pretty cool. And luckily now things are coming, you know, back in person, but because I live in Arizona, I can't go to the events in LA all the time. So that's where I think social media just has so much power to help us in our jobs, but also to make friends and not feel so alone. Because as most people know, composers mostly we just sit in our room alone all day making music, and sometimes it can make us a little freaky. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, does that get really lonely really fast when you're in that creative mode?
I think so. When I'm hyper focused and I really am working on a project I'm passionate about and I'm having a lot of fun, I don't notice that I'm alone. But there are certain days where maybe you're having a little bit of writer's block, or you're just having a bad day, and then it's not like you can go to an office, you know, and be able to sit with people and be around people and feel better that way. So I think those days are when I feel it the most, which is usually when I turn to my friends online and I just tell them how I'm feeling, and they usually help a lot.
That's great. And it's great to have community like that. That's in the society and in the alliance, in those types of groups.
Yeah. I think the film composing industry is a lot smaller than people think it is. So once you're part of the community, people usually hear about you through word of mouth, or like sometimes on Instagram or Facebook, they have recommendations for people to follow or friend. So I think it's a really quick like spiral into getting to know everyone pretty quickly.
Okay. Yeah, we had a few questions come in about how to break into the industry. But before I dive into that with you, for those societies and those groups, do you have to already be well on your way as a composer to be a part of them, or can you join if you're just
definitely
interested?
not. I'm pretty sure. So the three big groups I'd recommend are the SCL, the AWFC, the Alliance for Women Film Composers, and also the Composers Diversity Collective for Composers of Color. All of them, I believe, have student memberships if you're a student, but also if you're early career. And honestly, I would still consider myself early career because I'm in the first 10 years of freelancing full time. They have a lot of really excellent resources. They have mentorship programs that happen once or twice a year. They have, like I said, Q&As, panels. Some of them are in person. The STL also has, I believe it happens once every 2 months. They have an early career lunch hour, which I would highly, highly recommend. You get to have lunch over Zoom with, you know, composers like Carlos Rafael Rivera and Anne Catherine Dern, and they're there to talk with you in person and talk about creating your career from the business side to the composing side. So highly, highly recommend being a part of those free events. It's helped me a lot.
Awesome. That's an incredible resource. Thank you so much for sharing
Of
for
course.
everybody. And we'll be putting that out there, I think, for people to get connected and find community in that field. When so so you started playing violin when you were 7,
Mm-hmm.
and you've been playing music ever
Yes.
since. What actually drew you to music and film? Because that's a very niche thing to go from classical to film.
Yeah, it is very niche. I think, and I feel like most film composers have stories like this. When I was a kid, how I bonded with my dad was watching movies with him every weekend. Movies like Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, Star Wars, these films that have huge, epic soundtracks. I used to be obsessed with the Pirates of the Caribbean soundtrack and would listen to it and pretend I was a pirate, like swinging around my room. So there are all these really nostalgic memories I have connected with film music. And when I was thinking about, okay, I want to write music, but writing for the concert stage isn't fulfilling me in the way that I wish it was, I just reflected a lot about what kind of music has stuck with me my whole life. And it's always been film music. And then I was able to connect with a video game composer who lives near me. So he was the one that kind of introduced me into the whole world of film.
Awesome. And then you were composing in college too,
Yes.
right?
Yeah, I was kind of winging it the whole time, which was a little tough at times. And yes, for the comment, it is the Society of Composers and Lyricists, the Alliance for Women Film Composers, and the Composer Diversity Collective. All three are really great resources for all of you.
I'm putting some of those in the comments for people, and we can certainly include that in the description too on the replay, so people can have easy access to find those groups.
Yes, they all have Instagrams and websites, so you should be able to hopefully find them easily.
Amazing. Well, awesome. Your story is so cool. On that journey, so you talked about your inspirations of like film soundtracks and the music. Were there other inspirations in your life, maybe people that inspired you to do what you do?
I feel like I'm constantly inspired by all sorts of artists, not just film composers, although I will say, there are people like obviously John Williams is someone that I've really looked up to my whole life, but I'm constantly inspired by the people around me, whether it's my colleagues in the film composer community or musicians I went to school with or filmmakers I went to school with or I'm friends with. I feel like everyone has something to offer me that I've never thought about before as an artist. So I'm constantly like listening to all sorts of music, following all sorts of artists, visual artists, everything around me really inspires me. A big artist I really look up to is Labyrinth as well. And he just recently started getting into more like film composing with Euphoria too, which is really cool to see.
Awesome. That's amazing. Yeah, I love, and sometimes when when we're inspired, we're also drawing influence of styles and things and in different genres or types of movies.
Mm-hmm.
When you work on projects, do you have certain maybe stories or types of projects that you're drawn to, or that if you were to choose your projects, things that you would prefer to work on?
I think honestly, I like all sorts of genres. Like for instance, I'm working on a horror film right now and another dramatic film. I think I get really connected to characters. So if a filmmaker gives me a script or a rough cut and I feel like I'm connected to a character, or I feel like I can understand them and I can be empathetic towards them and their story, that's something that I want to help tell. Because most of the films that I find myself drawn to are the ones that like pull at my heartstrings and make me feel like this character is a real person. And anything I can do to elevate that filmmaker's vision, I think that's what I look for. So it's not necessarily a specific story or genre, although I will say sometime in my life I want to do like a period piece like Pride and Prejudice, because those are like my guilty pleasure movies that I like to watch. But yeah, I'm just drawn to character, really.
Okay, yeah. I love that because that's something that gives a lot of variety too.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost like good writing, good characters, people that you relate with. There's a lot of feeling there. And through
Yeah.
music, you can really tap into that feeling and help other people feel it maybe stronger.
Yeah, and that's their whole job as composers, right? Is to help service the vision, service the story, and hopefully, reach people in a way musically that maybe the dialogue or the visual couldn't quite reach, if that makes sense. So yeah, and also something to watch out for as a composer, it's kind of easy to get pigeonholed into
Mm.
a genre. So that's something I'm always very cognizant about as a composer, is trying to do all sorts of projects so that people don't look at me and they're like, oh, she's the one that does comedy only. Do you know what I mean? Because that's something
Yeah.
to look out for, because it happens to some really talented composers. Not It's not their own fault, just whatever they work on. So that's also why I try to keep an open mind about all sorts of films to avoid
Yeah.
that.
I like that. And I've always had a theory about that myself, because it's the same as when an actor gets typecast. I think it's easy
Mm-hmm.
for anyone in a creative field to somebody else to put their perception of them like and be like, oh,
Yeah.
this is who you are.
Right, right. Yeah, it's definitely, I will say, when you're a film composer, you're working for other people. So you want to enjoy the story and you want to feel fulfilled, but also know that sometimes you might be working on something you don't feel as fulfilled by. So it's kind of like a balance you have to have, because you don't want to be pigeonholed, but you also don't want to say no to work. So it's just something to think about, which is also why I feel like a lot of composers do their own artistic stuff also on the side too.
Yeah, what type of artistic stuff do you do on the side?
Um, I like to do a lot of like producing and arranging for other artists. So I feel like it gives me a lot of flexibility. Usually, because the artist comes to me with an idea, but then they're like, okay, do whatever you want with it. So that's what I really enjoy. And sometimes I just have days where I'm just improvising music that someone maybe will never see. And it's just an opportunity for me to explore sounds that I want to explore and just like get my creative juices flowing. I think eventually I'd like to do some sort of personal solo album, like instrumental album. But right now the focus is like film stuff. So maybe when I have a little bit more time, if that ever happens.
Yeah. Do you have dreams in those other areas as well in terms of albums and or like I'm not sure
Yeah,
where
I
else
think
it
it'd be
branches
cool.
besides film. Yeah.
I've already done an EP, which
Oh, cool.
my city hired me to do. It became a sound installation at my local park. So I asked my neighborhood over email what kind of genres they would like to hear. So I was creating my own work, but like within parameters of what my community wanted to hear. So that was a really enjoyable experience, and I got to explore genres that aren't necessarily used in film that often. Like I got to create like a Portuguese like R&B slash like reggaeton track and like meditation tracks, and it's all over the place. So I think I'd like to explore that a little bit further, just because I'm interested in. Sometimes want to do all the things, you know.
Yeah.
I'm
No,
sure
I
many
get that.
musicians relate to that. So giving myself space to explore, whatever I want to explore is just what I'm interested in.
Yeah. I love that. And a lot of times when we want to do all the things, sometimes it's like, okay, but which thing is for right now? And you can
Right.
still have there's no dream too big. You can dream
Mm-hmm.
all of the dreams and accomplish all of them. But sometimes it's like, okay, but which one is right now and which one is tomorrow and which one
Yes.
is next
Yeah,
week?
definitely. So right now my focus is definitely like film music and working and connecting with more filmmakers. But being a musician is a lifetime. It's not even a job. It's an identity. I'm sure for any musician. So it's not like I have a time limit. We don't have any time limit to create what we want to create.
Yeah, that's good. With film, there's time limits in terms of like a film is a certain length or scenes are a certain length. What
Mm-hmm.
type of guidelines or barriers are helpful in composing? Like, is time helpful to know, like, okay, it's not endless and vast, you have like something to focus on?
Yeah. Honestly, like I said, like film composer's job is what the filmmaker wants, what the director, the showrunner, the producers want. So they're already giving you parameters. For instance, you have a spotting session when you're going through the film together with the filmmakers, and they tell you exactly where they want music, and usually they have an idea of what kind of music they're looking for, what emotions, what instruments, so they're already kind of giving you parameters, which I appreciate because sometimes it can get overwhelming to think of how many options film music has. So having a filmmaker that gives you an idea of what they want already, I consider a blessing, because then I can kind of focus a little bit more. Otherwise, I kind of am like, I don't know what to write, and then I just don't write anything. And then also, of course, you're on a deadline. So I'm a person that's very motivated by deadlines. If I didn't have one, I probably wouldn't do anything. I'd just be sitting here like doing nothing. So that's the nice thing about film music is, you're given a calendar deadline, you're given parameters, you're given what the filmmaker wants, and then you just write.
Yeah, I think those parameters even help the creative process then, because then you're free within them to create something beautiful.
Yeah, some filmmakers are more flexible than others. It just depends on their personality and their vision for the project, and if they already have temp music in. So there's a lot of different things that can affect that. You just have to figure out who they are as a person, and then you can figure out how much room you have to play and how much they would like the cue to be, exactly what they say. So that's also part of our job as composers, is you have to, know how to be a people person and how to communicate, and know that every collaboration with a different filmmaker is probably going to be different from other projects, if that makes sense. Just like any team project.
Yeah, within that team, are you mostly working with the directors, or are there other members of the team that maybe, like, I don't know if cinematography plays into what you're seeing and what you're hearing, or if it's all coming from the director?
Someone like the cinematographer usually is not in meetings with the composer. It's usually the director or the showrunner if you're doing a TV show. Sometimes the editor will come in and give some ideas, especially because the editor sometimes is editing with music in mind. So it's always good to talk with them. And then, of course, if a project has producers, usually the producers have a say as well. So the director or showrunner is usually my primary contact, but there are other people who are watching and giving feedback, which can be a little difficult sometimes if the powers that be are not agreeing with each other. So as a composer, look to who your point of contact is, and if anything is confusing, like, make sure you follow up about that. Not everyone is going to be happy 100% of the time, but ideally you can all collaborate as a team and be happy with the product you've created.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. It's kind of a matter of too many chefs in the kitchen. But at the end of the day, there's like final decision makers in film. Sometimes that's the director, but the person who calls the shots a little bit.
Yeah, although I will say, like, really big studio films that have like 500 producers, sometimes the producers have more say than the director. I've heard some stories of composers who are working on big Hollywood studio films, and there are producers who trump what the what the director is saying, which is not usually ideal, but that's just how it is sometimes. There's a lot of hierarchy in Hollywood.
That makes sense, yeah, especially where the funding is coming from and things like that may have a big say.
Whoever has the money kind of has the final say, which sometimes is a little difficult to deal with. But I would say for most productions I've been on, almost all of them have been really enjoyable, and I've never personally had an experience like that, which is good.
That's really good. Amazing. I'm looking at some of the questions I have here, and a few more have come in. What's the most difficult thing about being a composer? We mentioned some of the hard things. Is there one thing that kind of stands out as like, that's the hardest?
I think just the reality, if you're a freelance film composer, which almost all of us are freelance, you're running your own business. So I'm not being creative all the time, like maybe I would wish to be. So you have to realize we're running our own business, we're doing our own marketing, we're making our own websites, we're doing our own networking, our own emails, calls. Usually it's a one-person show, right? So I think that's sometimes the difficult part, especially when you're an artist or creative type. We want to just be making stuff and wish someone else could do it for us, but the reality is you also have to do the business side and keep track of your accounting and your taxes and follow up with people about paying you and, all these different types of thing. So I think that was the biggest hurdle that I had to get over when I first went full-time freelance. And I think it's not talked a lot about in school, which I wish it was, about how
Yeah.
to be your own business owner. I had to figure out how to, I started my own LLC, you know, all these different types of things that my teachers never taught me. I just kind of figured it out. Um, you know, ideally you can get like an agent or a manager, but the reality is that doesn't happen right away. And they're not going to sign you unless they see they can make money off of you, because that's how the business works. So
Right.
the large majority of composers, we're all doing everything ourselves, business wise and creative wise.
Yeah. Did you find any resources, even though school didn't really, you know, teach those things? They don't, and that's for, I think for most filmmakers in general. Like,
Yeah, I think the biggest resource is your community. Um, because composers are pretty much the only ones in Hollywood who are not unionized, it's really easy to be
mm,
taken advantage of, to sell yourself short, to maybe not know how to write your own contract or whatever. So there's a lot of really excellent resources, whether it's sometimes, I think the SCL has some contract templates on their website, but I also recommend there's a ton of Facebook groups. The biggest one is called Perspective Forum, I think is what it's called. It has like huge composers in there like Hans Zimmer, and you can just ask questions. And there's a lot of industry higher ups in that forum who have answered a lot of questions about rates, contracts, websites, reels. I also just ask composers I look up to, like, hey, I love your website. How did you make this? Like, what service do you use? Or I'll get an offer for a film, and maybe the director isn't exactly sure what they want to pay me, and I don't want to sell myself short, you know, and give them a number that is selling myself short. So I'll ask someone who's older than me, who's been in the industry longer, and be like, hey, I got this offer for whatever, whatever. What would you charge them? So don't be afraid to talk about money with other composers, because that's the way that we make sure we're not undercutting each other and that you're making a living, ideally.
yeah. Oh, I love that. And it goes back to that conversation about community and people looking out for each other.
Yeah.
And we've talked about that on a previous featured artist episode.
Mm-hmm.
You know, just kind of the fact that there's this mentality in some groups that you have to earn your stripes or figure it out yourself, but like the power of saying like, no, we're here, we got your back, and we're looking out for you. I think
Yeah.
it's very beautiful in the creative world to see
Yes,
that.
definitely. I will say there are some people in the industry who are like, well, I had a really shitty time when I was your age, and so I'm not going to help you. But they're definitely in the minority. If you're a nice person and you're genuine, people will want to help you. And usually, if you ask someone, hey, I really admire blah, blah, blah about your work, I would love to chat with you about your journey in the industry and maybe some advice you have. There are a lot of people who have never been asked that, and they get super excited. And that's how I've connected with a lot of composers and other filmmakers, just by asking people about themselves, not in a framework where you're trying to get a job, but just so you can get to know them better. Usually that spirals into either some sort of mentorship or friendship where you can go to them if you have questions, or sometimes people will volunteer opportunities for you. So, without even asking. So I would say the biggest thing is being genuine, not being afraid to ask questions, and find your people in the industry, people that you trust, people you know you can go to for help. I always like to consider myself someone like that, because I would not be where I am today without people giving me the time of day and helping me with these things, because it's not obvious, you know, what you charge for whatever, you know?
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. For I have a lot of different questions here, but I'm very curious to know what things you're proud of, like accomplishments that you've done so far in your work or projects that you've worked on.
That's a really good
Can you
question.
highlight some of those things for us?
This past January, I was lucky enough to be part of the Los Angeles Film Conducting Intensive, which I would recommend that anyone apply to. I was able to conduct my own orchestral piece at the Newman scoring stage with 45 professional musicians, and I was like shitting my pants. I'm telling you, I was super nervous, but I'm really proud of doing something I was scared of, and having opportunity to conduct these professional musicians who have worked with people like, John Williams,
Yeah.
was a very special moment for me. And even though I was super scared in the moment when I'm hearing these horns like play this melody I wrote in my bedroom, it was like, okay, this is where I'm meant to be. Like this, it was like that feeling where you're like, okay, yes, all my hard work is totally worth moments like this. So I'd say that's the most recent one. Um, I had a premiere at the Chinese Theater um, in Hollywood last fall with a documentary I worked on with Jane Goodall in it. And I was really proud of that one because Jane Goodall is like my childhood hero. And also, I wrote that score in my college dorm room when I had like no technology. And I'm listening to it back in these huge speakers and this huge um, theater. And it was kind of surreal. Like thinking back to that time in my life when I didn't have, technology or software and I wasn't very good at mixing, and there's a lot of things
Yes.
I would change about that score, but it's also nice to look back and be proud of, younger you for trying something new.
Yeah, absolutely. And to see that evolve over time, because I've noticed something. A lot of artists, I don't know if a lot of artists, but there's this thing where it's like, okay, I'll wait until I'm ready, or like
Mm-hmm.
I'm not gonna write or share this piece because it's not everything that I had hoped that it would be.
Mm-hmm.
What do you have to say about that?
I will say I'm totally like that. Probably most artists are. I'm like definitely a perfectionist. And, there's a lot of things I've shared like on my SoundCloud or whatever when I was first starting out that are definitely private now. But I would say you're never ready. Like being a composer or musician or an artist, you're constantly learning. There's no like moment where you're like, okay, I know everything about music now and I'm a genius. Like you're always learning something new. Every project is an opportunity to teach yourself a new skill or learn new things about the business or your software or whatever. And I will say that it might seem like no one's listening or people are judging you or whatever. But the reality is, most people are listening and being like, whoa, this is super cool. Like, I wish I could do that. I mean, people who don't write music, when they look at us musicians, they're like, wow, this is magic. So think about that, I think. But I will say, like, most of my film scoring jobs, I've had tons of imposter syndrome where I think, I'm not good enough for this. I'm not ready for this. But I say yes anyway, even though it scares me because I know it's an opportunity to get better and to improve my own confidence as a musician and hopefully like maintain that relationship with that filmmaker and maybe even be friends with them. So I would say like you think about the positive things about how you can improve, how you can uh, get stronger as a musician and as a person and as a collaborator, and just realize I've talked to some, higher up Hollywood composers who you might look at them and be like, this person is a freaking genius. There's no way they could be scared. And they've confided, like, oh, I feel imposter syndrome literally all the time. These are people that have Oscars and Emmys and Tonys. Like, these people also feel the same way. It's just that's part of being human, I think. And also artistic people, we tend to be huge perfectionists that judge ourselves harsher than we would ever judge anyone else's work. So, be kind to yourself.
Yeah, I love that. Be kind to yourself. And I also think it's important to have these conversations and let people know that that's a very common thing. Because
Mm-hmm.
most people that I know who feel that, we think it's like we're the only one who feels it. And then we're opened up to whole communities of like, it's okay, it's a human thing.
Yeah, that's part of being a human on this earth. And also, it goes along with what I said before. Like, don't be afraid to confide in people that you're having a hard time. And because most of the time when I've done that, other composers are like, same. Or like, I felt this just the other day. And it makes you feel less alone because you're like, okay, well, these people who I think are really badass composers, have the same emotions as I do. So, we're all people at the end of the day.
Yeah, and then that ends up opening up your mind to be like, wow, the sky's the limit. I can be on this stage conducting my compositions, and like I can go and do anything. Like, I don't know, there's like an empowering part to it too.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's good to look back on stuff you've done, you know, even 6 months to a year ago and be like, damn, like 10-year-old me would have literally never expected this, you know? So it's always good to, you know, reflect on your own accomplishments and be proud of yourself. It's important.
Yeah, and there's this, I love that being proud of yourself is important because there's also on the, like the flip side, the being humble, or like you shouldn't be too like proud, or like, I don't know. It's very good to be like, yes, I did that.
Yeah, I mean, being proud of yourself doesn't mean that you have a huge ego. I think a huge ego would be like, I'm a genius and I know everything. But I mean, the reality is almost no one is like that. So saying, I'm proud of myself, I learned X, Y, and Z skill, I created this thing, and now I'm excited for what future me is going to create and learn. I think that's the best way to go about it.
Awesome. Amazing. I have another question here about, and this one's more specific, so I'm not sure what you have to share about on the specificness. What are your biggest tips for film score session conducting? Maybe
Yeah,
someone else who wants to do that.
The Film Conducting Intensive, for anyone who's just joining, the Los Angeles Film Conducting Intensive is this annual program you can apply to. Taught me so much. I mean, I've conducted before, but it was never a film scoring session, and they operate a lot differently than if you were doing an orchestra concert or whatever. The main thing is most of these musicians are coming in by sight reading. So you as the composer need to make your parts as easy to sight read as possible. That doesn't mean the music has to be easy, but layout wise, it has to be clear, clean, no like accidents or weird text or clashing or whatever. So knowing how to format your parts correctly is super important preparation. The other thing I learned is that time is money in these sessions. So a lot of the time you've booked for however many hours and you need to get however many minutes of music done. And if you're working with union musicians, and most of them in LA are, you have to pay overtime as soon as you go over the allotted time. Mm-hmm. So it's important to be super efficient with your time, not wasting musicians' time. They won't waste yours. Those are the biggest things. And then also having someone you trust in the booth. So if you're conducting, you're hearing it as a conductor. People in the booth are hearing it through their monitors. So also having someone in there being like, hey, in here, the horns sound too loud or whatever, which is a classic for horns. That was really helpful as well. So the instructors were doing that for us while we were conducting. And if you're not conducting, you can be the one in the booth that's doing that. And then just like acting like you know what you're doing, even if you maybe don't, and everything will be good.
Oh, amazing. Yeah, and I know that was super helpful to a lot of people, and yeah, I'm less familiar with the conducting and music side of this, so mm-hmm. I'm just really curious. I think that's amazing that you're doing all of this.
Yeah, I'm definitely still would not consider myself like a professional conductor, but it taught me a lot about a film composer and how as a film composer I can make the musicians happy. Because if the musicians are happy and feeling like everything's going good, you'll have a great session. If you have a lot of people raising their hands, asking questions, pointing out mistakes, that's going to lead to a lot of really cranky people, and it won't be as good of an experience.
Okay. All right. We love that, because then that basically gives them the freedom when they're able to play more freely and it's flowing maybe, or the emotion is evoked maybe a little better too.
Yeah, and just know that the musicians who are hired for these professional sessions, they're, you know, top tier, amazing musicians. So when they are free to play and explore and express themselves, that's the best thing for a composer, because then all that emotion comes across in your score.
I love that. So give people, it's almost in other film disciplines, it's like the art of delegating and allowing people to do their thing and do what they do best.
Yeah, and there's definitely sessions where you might only be working with one or two musicians, and those are really interesting sessions because it's a lot more back and forth. The musician sometimes can suggest things. So then it's a really enjoyable collaboration as well. So those sessions are a little bit different than huge orchestral sessions. And in a way, they're a little bit more freeing too.
Awesome. And I have a dumb question on that. So when you're conducting in this, that's when it's like the recording for the film? Like it's the same session, or is it more like
Yeah.
having them learn it for a different recording session?
No, so they're showing up, they're sight reading, you're recording, that's the one that goes into the film. So hopefully you get a few takes and then you can go into the mixing room later and decide which takes you want to do and edit it or whatever. But like I said, time is money. So you don't really have the money to do a recording session where they're not actually recording. So these people show up for a few hours and you got your film score ready.
Awesome. We have a question here in the comments about your process of getting involved in a film project. Specifically, do you read the script before it's like pictures locked? Is it when pictures locked that then you get to dive right in?
It depends on when the filmmaker is thinking about bringing on a composer. Ideally, composers want to be on as early as possible. I really enjoy reading the script and thinking about where score could be and feeling like I'm a part of the story from the beginning and not just brought in at the very end. For some filmmakers, music is maybe not as much a priority and they bring me on when there's a rough cut. So it really depends, although for any filmmakers who are listening, bring us on as early as possible because not only does it make us feel more like we're part of the team, but also we have a lot more time to sit with it and make sure we're giving enough time and energy to it. Because if you bring us on very last minute, there are certain times where I'm just rushing to get it done and maybe I'm not getting as much creative time with it and it's more about just getting a product out versus the projects where I'm brought on super early feels more like I have time to sit with my ideas, I have time to explore certain ideas. So that's usually how I like to work. And I will say, like in the Lord of the Rings, Howard Shore is brought on like 2 years before the film was finished. So and such an amazing score was created because I feel like he had all this time to sit with it. So that's an example I like to use a lot.
I think that's huge for every filmmaker of a different discipline who is listening, because when I was at film school, a lot like earlier on, a lot of people would wait until the last second to be like, oh yeah, I should get a composer, or oh yeah, like, and to your point, it's like even if you're working with the greatest composer, it's like you need the time and to
yeah, I mean,
to connect and do your creative work.
Yeah, there are some horror stories, even in the huge Hollywood, actually, especially in huge Hollywood studio films, where maybe a composer was fired and someone was brought on last minute and then they have 1 month to write 2 hours of music and have it recorded. Like, that is a really extreme timeline. Luckily, I've never had to do anything that big in that short amount of time. But it's something to think about. You want your composer to be able to sit with it, have time. You want to have time to give feedback and not feel like, oh, I wish we could have changed this, but we ran out of time. So more time is always better. It makes a more enjoyable collaboration, and usually the composer is really proud of the score. I mean, not that I'm never submitting things I'm not proud of, but
right.
There's certain things where it feels kind of like I'm just a machine and I need to get it done. And there are other times where I feel like I'm able to explore this creative energy in this space, in a safe space where I have time.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So you mentioned being freelance. There's a question here about agent management. Mm-hmm. So like a precursor to that is they're asking, how did you find an agent or management, and when do you think is the right time to? I'm not sure where you are on that timeline, so yeah.
So I'm in a little bit of a weird transition space where I'm not actually signed by an agent, but I randomly met an agent at Craft Angle who we were both part of the World Soundtrack Awards. That's also a great resource. They have a festival in Belgium, but at this time it was during COVID, so they had this Zoom networking session. And he wasn't even supposed to be in there, but he was. And I had prepared my questions ahead of time for him about what can I be doing now to prepare myself to get an agent or whatever. And he told me that I was the only one that had prepared questions, and I was the only one that sent a thank you email immediately after. And because I did that, he wanted to invest in me. So he is kind of watching over me. He helps me with contract stuff. And if I have a question about rates, like, am I selling myself short? I'll ask him. So, and that resource just randomly came from doing these Zoom, networking meetup things. So it's hard because I could never have planned to have met him, but I could react in a way where I look prepared, and I'm just grateful for his time and his input. And you'd be surprised how many people don't send thank you notes. Highly recommend. People love that, and it makes them feel special. And that's how that relationship was formed. So I think there are a lot of stories, maybe not exactly like that, but composers just meet an agent who takes an interest in their work and is kind of keeping an eye on them, maybe at panels or film premieres or whatever. Agents are always looking for the next thing because they're agents and that's their job, right? It's kind of a catch-22 because they're not going to sign you unless they know you can make money. But then it's like, how am I going to get the projects that make money without an agent? And that's a really tricky thing. Sometimes I start spiraling thinking about that because it's kind of hard. So I will say, like, you don't need both and you don't really need either. So I wouldn't have your goal be, I want an agent to sign me next month, because I could never have expected this agent to be looking after me, and he feels like he's still kind of watching out for my next thing. You know what I mean? Right. So he's not, if he hasn't officially signed me, agents are some of them are kind of picky. And you can also, as a composer, you don't have to say yes to the first agent that comes your way. Like, you should be working with someone that you trust, that's not going to screw you over. There are some stories of agents signing people and then never giving them the time of day. So it's sometimes having an agent isn't even that helpful. So I would say just keep working, keep making genuine connections, keep showing up to these networking stuff. Most of them are still on Zoom. Email people, cold email people. A really great resource I would highly recommend is getting an IMDb Pro subscription and then researching films that you like, that you've seen, because a lot of these composers or music teams or producers, some of them have direct contacts listed. And if you have an IMDb Pro subscription, you can see that. So that's where a lot of my connections have come from, is I just cold email people that I found on IMDb Pro, So you don't need an agent to be doing that for you. And everyone I know with an agent is still doing like 80% of the legwork finding gigs. So it's a little tricky to say how to get one because I think everyone's story is different. But I will say, like, it used to be my ultimate priority to have one. And now it's like, yeah, I mean, eventually it would be cool, but you don't need one to be successful.
Right. I like that focus. It's like, be genuine, be a good person, be thoughtful. Like, the thank you cards is just an expression of thoughtfulness. Mm-hmm. It's not the thank you card itself. It's like, wow, you put thought into that. You prepared questions. Yeah. But focusing on the work and then watch what unfolds.
Yeah, and you never know. Like, you could meet someone and then like 3 years later they'll be like, oh, I have this feature film I want to hire you for. So never underestimate the power of like the long game with networking, because it takes a long time and a lot of money to get films made. So it's not like an immediate thing that will happen. So invest in these relationships and these friendships in your community, and the jobs will start coming.
Awesome. Somebody is asking, do you have any favorite sample libraries?
Like most composers, I'm a big fan of Spitfire Audio. I think they have a really wide range of stuff. They also have the Spitfire Audio Labs, which are completely free, which is actually what I started with, film scoring. And they have some really cool instruments on there that I feel like I'm still always using. I also like Reveal Sound's Spire library for anything electronic, which I like to do a lot of electronic hybrids with string sounds. And they have really cool like presets, especially if you're into EDM or electronic production or whatever. Spire is a really great library, and it's pretty affordable too.
Amazing. We love sharing the resources. So
Mhm.
those are all really good ones. Someone is asking, have you thought about releasing sample instruments, maybe via piano book?
I've actually never thought about that. I know that it kind of takes a lot of work and people who are better at technology than me, maybe one day, but I'm sure there are other composers who have released that sample packs. There's also people who release stuff on Splice. So Splice is a really good subscription service, and there's quite a few composers who have created packs that you can use.
Okay, awesome. And someone is asking, what was your latest project? Let's hear about it.
My latest project that I finished, I worked on two contemporary dance films from the same company that I work with. One of them was kind of about past, present, and future, so it was really electronic, like warped stuff. And then the other one was more ballet focused, so I was able to do more classical, traditional piano and string sounds. So that was really fun. I really enjoy working with dancers. I also, I'm working on a horror film right now and a drama. So I feel like I'm just constantly like making new sounds and exploring. So those aren't done yet, but I am working on those currently.
Amazing. And someone else is asking if you're available for an indie film that's in post, if you're looking for more projects or would like to be connected.
Possibly. My email is in my Instagram area. You can just hit email. It depends on your timeline, because I'm pretty booked up for the next few months. But I'm always happy to hear about projects, and if for whatever reason I can't swing it, I always recommend other composers looking for work. So I can definitely help in that search if it's not me. So
Amazing. So what we talked about your journey in filmmaking. I love all of the resources that you're giving out to people and just the generosity of your heart to help
oh
people
yeah,
in the field.
I would be nowhere without people giving me resources. I think gatekeeping is stupid, and especially now
Yeah.
with the internet, like there's so much available. I also have a Google Drive of just like a bunch of random links and books I like and resources. So if anyone wants that, they can email me or DM me, and I'll send you the link also, because I've kind of been accumulating things from other people about hopefully it can be a good place to start. Because starting as a film composer is really weird and daunting, and I remember how it felt at the beginning, and I was like, I don't know what I'm doing, and I don't know who to ask. So hopefully I can help a little bit so you don't feel that way as long as I did.
No, I love that. And that's super cool. Everybody, if you're interested, reach out to Adele for that. That sounds like an incredible resource for anyone looking to get started in the industry as a composer.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're almost at the hour, so we're winding down now. I think we hit all of the questions. Let me see if any more came out. Do you feel like you have to sacrifice your own creative vision as a film composer? Perhaps, your vision versus a director's vision.
um I'm very lucky for the majority of people I work with hire me for my creative voice, and they respect my vision. um but there have been moments where I'm writing something that I don't really agree that should be there. Um, that's kind of moments where you just have to kind of suck it up and be like, this is what the director wants. We want the director to be happy. Pick and choose your battles as a composer. I would say, like, pick one battle if you really need to in production. Like, the only time I've had to do that is when we were doing like 14 revisions on a 3-second ambient cue. And at a certain point, nothing was really changing, and I kind of had to put my foot down and be like, nothing's changing. We need to move on. But I use that very sparingly, because if you're always being like, no, I don't agree, let's do something else, the director is going to start pushing back a little bit, so you have to be careful. Sometimes it's just like that. Sometimes you have a director who knows exactly what they want, and they might be a little bit control freaky, which you see a lot in film. And, sometimes I just have to tell myself, okay, I don't really agree with this, but I'm going to do it because it's my job. And then maybe the next one will be a little bit more interesting.
That's good. And I think it's good to have that balance of, and a lot of it becomes a fine line of like feeling it, when to do one thing, when to do the other.
Yeah, that's, I think, at the beginning, I like to talk with directors about the emotion they're looking for versus the instrument sound they're looking for, because it's really easy to start getting too detailed, especially if the directors aren't as well versed in musical language or whatever. So I find it's a lot easier if you, right out of the gate, just ask them what emotion they're wanting in that scene. And then usually when you go that route, they tend to be a little bit more flexible about what you can try as a composer. Although I always ask, are there any instruments you don't want to hear? Because usually directors have very strong opinions about what they don't want, and that's also a really good place to start.
I think that's great, and that's basically just setting up the communication early on.
Yeah, it's all about communicating, making them feel heard, making sure that they understand you're there to help them, you're on their team. Also, it's important to remember that composers are brought on, we're like one of the last people brought on in post production. So if the director is feeling tired or upset or something else went wrong before you even showed up in production, you are bringing on that energy as well. So try to be a welcoming presence, a helpful presence. Sometimes you got to be the director's therapist. You know, you never know what has happened in production. Sometimes things just go horribly wrong and they're just really frustrated and want to be done with it. So definitely feel the vibes before you go too far into like advocating for a certain sound. Sometimes I'm like, wow, this director's having a real hard time. I'm just going to do whatever they say and hopefully they feel a little bit better about it.
Yeah, it's like reading the room, being empathetic, and just understanding the bigger picture.
Yeah, so being a composer is a very emotional job, and you have to be ready for that. You know, there's a lot of big personalities in the arts, as everyone knows, including us. So, in addition to helping out your collaborators and making sure they feel heard and listened to, also take care of yourself, because if you're feeling upset or if you're feeling like bad energy, like be really aware of that and how you take care of yourself, because there have been moments where I haven't realized I was starting to pile on all this negative energy, and then the project just starts feeling really annoying to me and like I don't want to be a part of it anymore. So um, I encourage composers or any musician, just really keep up the self-care, especially in crunch time or moments where, you know, maybe the filmmaker's a little stressed, and some people handle their stress better than others. That's just the reality of any type of team. So have things in place to take care of yourself and make sure you eat. Sometimes when I'm writing and I'm really hyper focused, I forget to eat meals. So that's something I'm always having to think about. I have to set timers for myself to eat lunch. So yeah, think just basics, things like that. Take care of yourself.
Yeah, I think those are so important, and that's a great way to kind of wind down our hour. Do you have more of these like little self-care? Sometimes the little thing goes a long way, like little self-care things for creatives and when they're in the process.
Um, keep water by you. Keep snacks. I like to keep candy because candy makes me feel better. Knowing when to stop for the day. If you're starting to feel like you're going a little insane, just stop. Take a breath. Take a walk. I like to do kickboxing, something to get my energy out. Exercise. Play with your dog or cat. I don't know. Anything that's not writing music, and come back the next day or when you feel ready. Like rest is super important to me. Um, I prioritize rest as much as I prioritize work, because my music suffers if I am sleep deprived or hungry or sick or whatever. Um, so I would encourage people to never put work ahead of your basic bodily functions, because your art will suffer for it.
Mm. I think that's you can't talk enough about that. That's so important as artists and as creatives. Um, you put a lot of yourself in your work,
Yeah,
and
writing
yeah,
music can be a really emotional experience, and you can feel real tired after writing a film score. I mean, I'm always exhausted after I finish something. Um, so honoring your emotions, also like therapy. is, and taking care of your mental health is so important. Like, as musicians, we live up here, right? That's how we feel things. But normally, when you're a highly creative person, you're also highly sensitive, and most of us are prone to things like anxiety, which I have. Um, and if I was not regularly taking care of my brain as much as my body, everything would fall apart. So if you have the means to, or at least confide in people you trust when you're having a hard time, just know that you aren't alone and it's normal. And when you're an artistic person, our brains are just like that. So that is really important self care too.
I love that. And thank you so much for sharing. We're right at the hour, so thank you everyone for coming and tuning in.
Yeah,
Adele,
thank you.
this was a delightful chat. Like I'm so glad I got to meet you and have this
Yeah,
conversation.
likewise. Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for your questions. I just want to reiterate, like, you can always DM me. If I don't see your DM, email me because sometimes I forget to check. Um, Community is everything, and I hope that this was helpful. And if I can give you help or a resource or recommend you for a job that I can't take, like, that's what I want to do for you. So just know, like, keep going, everyone.
Awesome. So yes, everybody go and if you're not already doing so, go and follow Adele and the work that she's doing. Stay connected, stay plugged in, join the communities that she recommended, but also our community is here for you too at the Women in Film Project. So we're excited to keep furthering the mission and helping people do the journey together and go after our dreams. So again, I'm Morgan Taylor. You can follow me at Morgan Taylor TV. And thank you so much for listening to this conversation.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, take care.
You too.